Europe Commander and 2nd Marine Expeditionary Brigade Commanding General, arrived in Turkey February 9 to lead military coordination efforts with U.S. agencies involved in the humanitarian aid and disaster relief efforts. We'll continue to provide you with updates as we receive them. EUCOM will be issuing a press release with further details. But again, we offer our thoughts and prayers to the people of Turkey and Syria during this tragic and difficult time. And finally, Secretary Austin welcomed Canadian Minister of National Defense Anand for a bilateral meeting here in the Pentagon today. The Secretary expressed his thanks and appreciation to Minister Anand for the cooperation rendered by Canada in tracking the PRC high-altitude surveillance balloon that violated the sovereignty of both of our countries. During the meeting, both leaders reaffirmed the close defense relationship between the United States and Canada, and a readout will be available later today on defense.gov. And with that, I will take your questions. We'll start with Associated Press, Tara Kopp.
Hi, thank you for doing this. A couple of questions on this latest shoot down. First, what type of U.S. fighter aircraft were used, and what type of munition did they fire? And do you already have Navy assets or Coast Guard assets involved in a recovery process? And then I have a few more.
Thanks, Tara. So the aircraft that took down the object was an F-22, flying out of Joint Base Elmendorf in Alaska. It employed an AIM-9X to take down the object. In terms of assets that are currently involved, in terms of recovery, we have HC-130, HH-60, and CH-47 aircraft participating in that recovery effort.
Okay. You mentioned there was a reasonable threat. Was there also a threat to potentially this object detecting some of our more sensitive radar capabilities that are based in Alaska? And then what hasn't been said is where this object has come from. Is there any indication that this was also a Chinese surveillance balloon object, whatever it is?
Yeah, so at this point, we don't know the origin of the object. Again, we will know more once we're able to potentially recover some of those materials. But the primary concern, again, was the potential hazard to civil flight. And so, again, we'll know more later. Thank you.
No perceived threat to any of the radar installations that we have based in Alaska?
Again, right now, we'll know more once we assess it. We'll just leave it at that. Thank you. Liz.
Thanks for taking my question. What made this threatening enough to shoot down? What is different about this object than the last object that was over Alaska? Because it was chosen not to shoot the last one down over Alaska.
Yeah, so the important thing to understand here is anytime we detect anything, we're going to, first of all, observe it and then make a decision and take appropriate action. So you have to look at each individual case on its own merits. In this particular case, given the fact that it was operating at an altitude that posed a reasonable threat to civilian air traffic, the determination was made and the president gave the order to take it down.
Was there a specific threat, a specific civilian air traffic incident that could have happened?
Again, as you well know, civilian aircraft operate, at a variety of ranges up to 40 to 45,000 feet. So again, there was a reasonable concern that this could present a threat to or a potential hazard to civilian air traffic. So let me.
Just one more question. Yep. Has Secretary Austin reached out to his Chinese counterpart or any other counterparts at all since this has been tracked?
Since this particular object, no. Let me go here, and then I'll come over to Oren.
Things from the previous balloon have been recovered. What additional information you have now about the capabilities of that balloon?
Yeah, so we're continuing to assess that. Again, I'm not able to go into more detail other than, in addition to learning a lot about the balloon and the capabilities that it has while it was over the continental United States, we have identified or located a significant amount of debris on the ocean floor that will be very beneficial to us learning more about it. But at this point in time, I'm not going to have more details.
Manufacturing label on these equipments or the balloons indicate that they're all manufactured in China, sourced from China?
Again, I'm not going to have details to provide it at this point in time.
Also say that 39 other countries have indicated they have seen balloons in their territories. Are you sharing those information from the Pentagon to these countries, or the capabilities, how you shot them down?
So in terms of what we're learning about these balloons, I know the State Department has talked to this in terms of our international outreach. Certainly, the Department of Defense plays a role in those relationships, and so we will continue to work with our allies and partners to share information along with our State Department colleagues. Let me go to Oren.
Two questions. First, did this object show any signs of maneuverability or propulsion? And then you and other Pentagon officials made a big deal about how much intelligence was gathered by letting the other one float across much of the United States, and yet you shot this one down before it entered the United States. Is that the Pentagon bowing to political pressure? Was there nothing to gain from this one?
Yeah, so again, we're going to judge each of these on its merits. No indication at this time that it was maneuverable, but again, we'll know more. And in terms of entering the United States, it did enter U.S. airspace, and we took it down.
Did you gain intelligence from this one as you did from the previous one?
We're going to recover what we can from this, and more to follow.
And was the decision to shoot it down before it entered too far into the U.S. airspace, the Pentagon bowing to political pressure from the Hill?
Look, again, we're going to judge each of these objects on its own merits. It entered into U.S. airspace on February 9th. We sent up aircraft to assess what it was. The decision was made that it posed a reasonable threat to civilian air traffic. The president gave the order to take it down, and we took it down. Thank you, Laura. And then I'll go to Dan.
Can you? Oh, thanks. Sorry. Thanks for taking my question. So a couple questions. First of all, has anything like this happened before with a object this size, this shape, in this particular height for the 40,000 foot range? Has it happened before? And then second of all, why did you? Can you say more about why you knew that last balloon or object was from China, whereas this one you don't know?
So in terms of this particular object, again, as I highlighted, we don't know where it's from. It posed a reasonable threat to civilian air traffic, and so the determination was made to take it down. In terms of the other balloon, as I mentioned in our previous briefing, we have learned a lot about the Chinese surveillance high-altitude balloon program. We've gathered a lot of information over the last couple of years, and so we were able to, based on that information, detect at a very early stage. As it approached U.S. airspace, we had a good understanding of what it was. As I mentioned, we were able to monitor that closely, track it while it went over the continental United States, learn a lot about it, and take it down at the appropriate time.
So would you urge us to put this in a different bucket than that, or should we?
Yeah, I think I was pretty clear. This was traveling at about 40,000 feet, which posed a reasonable threat to civilian air traffic, and the decision was made to take it down. So, Dan.
When the pilots approached it, and they determined, I understand, that it was not manned. How did they determine that? And at that point, wouldn't it be possible to at least describe what they were looking at? Did it resemble a balloon or an airplane or what?
Again, we'll know more and have more information once we've recovered this. I will give credit to our pilots that they are very capable in terms of looking at an object, assessing whether or not this had the potential to be manned. At that altitude, something that small, very, very unlikely that it was manned. And so, again, no indication that it was manned, presented a potential reasonable threat to civilian air traffic, and we took it down.
What speed was it traveling at, by the way?
I don't have that information.
On the Chinese balloon, if we could go back, is it still, in the Pentagon's view, plausible or maybe even likely that it was not necessarily intentional that when that balloon turned and blew eastward, that it seemed to have not, had some technical problem?
Yeah, so Dan, what I would tell you is based on the information that we have, it was being maneuvered and purposefully driven along its track. Again, recognizing that winds do play a role because of the maneuverability of the balloon, it's our assessment that this was a purposeful mission. In terms of the Chinese motivations, again, I'd have to refer you back to China to talk about that. Ma'am, and then come to Nancy.
Thank you. emailed you police body camera footage showing a National Guard general in Ohio pushing my colleague and having to be escorted away from him this week. We asked the Ohio National Guard for comment, but do you, as a spokesperson for the Department of Defense, condone such?
Come here, check this out. Check this out, check this out. This right here, this cannot.
Chinese balloon that had been floating across parts of the United States has been shot down by an American fighter jet off the coast of South Carolina. The balloon, which the US says was being used to spy on military sites, appeared to plummet into the sea. Well, China continues to insist that it was in fact a stray civilian weather observation airship. Its foreign ministry has released a statement saying that China strongly disapproves of and protests against the US attack on a civilian unmanned airship by force. It also went on to say that American use of force is a clear overreaction and a serious violation of international practice. The BBC's Tim Ullman has the report.
All eyes had been on this solitary object floating serenely through US airspace. Was it a harmless weather balloon or a spy in the sky sent by the Chinese? Whatever it was, the American government had decided enough was enough. Look at that trail of white vapour on the left of your screen. That is a US F-22 fighter jet streaking towards the balloon. Then a second trail, this time from a Sidewinder missile, about to bring its journey to an abrupt end.
Suddenly we saw something take off from the jet and knew it was a missile, and you could see the explosion. Didn't hear anything, but saw the explosion of the balloon.
Gosh, it was almost like a moving cloud coming down. And then the smoke was gone and it just started slowly going down, but further out towards the ocean.
Whoa! Did you hear that? A few moments after the impact, the sound of the explosion can be heard at ground level. Then the remains of the balloon, its canopy torn to shreds, falls to the earth. A satisfying moment for President Biden, although he had to wait a few days for the operation to be carried out.
Order the Pentagon to shoot it down on Wednesday as soon as possible. They decided, without doing damage to anyone on the ground, they decided that the best time to do that was when it got over water.
In a statement, China's foreign ministry accused the US of overreacting. China expresses strong dissatisfaction and protests against the use of force by the United States. It added that it would reserve the right to make further necessary responses. The whole incident has caused tensions in what is an already delicate relationship. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken cancelled a planned trip to Beijing this weekend as a result. The balloon is believed to have come down in relatively shallow water, and any wreckage should be easily retrieved. The Americans hope they will then be able to work out exactly what the Chinese were up to. Tim Ullman, BBC News.
Well, earlier I spoke to our correspondent in Beijing, Stephen McDonald, and he told us a little bit more about that statement that was issued by the Chinese foreign minister.
I mean, it's been issued by an angry Chinese government, and you think this was supposed to be a weekend here in Beijing of building.
CNN's Ivan Watson is standing by in Hong Kong with the latest from there. Ivan, China doubling down, issuing some strong words after the U.S. downed the balloon?
That's right. Beijing is now saying that if the U.S. flies a balloon over China, it'll probably shoot it down. Look at this statement coming from the Chinese Defense Ministry. Quote, "The U.S. used force to attack our civilian unmanned airship, which is an obvious overreaction. We express solemn protest against this move by the U.S. side and reserve the right to use necessary means to deal with similar situations." there has been a shift in the tone from Beijing. On Friday evening, the Chinese Foreign Ministry expressed regret, saying that its airship, as it described it, which was used primarily for research purposes, had blown off course over the U.S. And now the Chinese government, different ministries are protesting the fact that this U.S. fighter jet shot the balloon down. The damage on the diplomatic front has already been visible, with the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken postponing a trip that he was supposed to make this weekend to Beijing over this balloon scandal, and calling the existence of this balloon over U.S. airspace a violation of U.S. sovereignty and of international law. The Chinese response has been, hey, this is this is due to weather, it's out of our control. They have been communicating with their U.S. counterparts, but this has clearly done some damage to what was an effort that began in November between President Biden and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping when they met face-to-face at the G20 summit in Bali to try to basically put a stop to the downward spiraling relations between the world's two largest economies. We'll just have to see whether there can be any efforts to revive diplomacy in the wake of this, I would argue, a growing crisis.
How was this incident seen in the region?
Well, look, it is creating repercussions elsewhere. The Canadian government came out over the weekend saying that this balloon had been seen in Canadian airspace. It summoned China's ambassador to Ottawa then. And now we're getting reports of a second object flying over Central and Latin America that looks remarkably similar to the balloon that was just shot down over the U.S. It was seen over Costa Rica, according to Costa Rican officials, on Thursday. And then on Friday, the Colombian Air Force put out this statement saying that this object was seen at an altitude of above 55,000 feet, which is roughly the same altitude as the balloon that was seen over the U.S., that it was monitored and it was moving at a speed of 25 knots, and that the Colombians followed it until it left Colombian